Hello once again, it's Tarot Tuesday, and today in our ongoing exploration of the major arcana, we're going to tackle the High Priestess card. That's a big one. Last week we went over the Magician, the number one card in the deck, and we examined the four elements on the four tools on his table and his connection to the as above and the so below, the macrocosm and the microcosm. And this is a map of what we would call gross reality or the physical world. Now, when we get to the High Priestess card, we dive into the psychic world. And I've talked a little bit about the word psychic in the past. I believe it was in the Moon card. As I did it a number of weeks ago, we looked at briefly at things like clairvoyant abilities, clairaudient, clairsentient abilities, some of those types of psychic abilities. And the Priestess card reflects the unformed structure of the psyche and the psychic realm. So maybe one way of looking at this is in terms of what we know as Vedanta. Vedanta is an Eastern yogic practice, dates back thousands of years, and they delineate existence into three levels of being. The first level being the gross level, that's the physical level of being, the material world that we exist in, and the objects of the physical world. The second world is the subtle world, and the subtle world is the non-material world. That's the world that exists, that it is comprised of thoughts, feelings, dreams, intuitions, imaginations, and memories. It is the non-substantive world, but a world nevertheless that exists. And in Western philosophy, we rejected this world when René Descartes came up with its expression, I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. And there's some depth to that exploration and to the story of how René Descartes came up with that expression. But we can summarize it as a methodology of doubt. So René Descartes conducted a thought experiment, and he said that in order to know what's true, I have to go about a process of doubting everything systematically. So tarot cards, the existence of physical objects, I doubt. Gravity, well, it wasn't delineated in mathematics yet, I doubt. I have 2 arms and 2 legs, I doubt. That the church is in the cultural forefront of European society, I doubt. The message of the church, I doubt. The things that politicians tell me, I doubt. Now, this deconstruction process that Descartes took us to left one thing standing, left one thing remaining in all of that. You may be able to guess it. I. In order for us to be able to doubt anything, I must exist. And so René Descartes came up with his expression, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, I exist. And when he did this, he was on let's say he was on a line of thinking that had 2 possible directions. One is the material world, and what he did do was set about and embark on the exploration of the physical world, of science, of reason, of rationality. And we can think of the Magician this way, but he rejected the non-material world. He said, I can't even trust my dreams. I can't trust my intuitions. I can't trust my thoughts. I don't know if my thoughts are my own or if they're somebody else's. I exist. My concept of I exists somewhere in etheric space, we can say, perhaps. But since I can't prove any of it, since I can't demonstrate any of it, since I can't get any consensus on what exists and how this operates, I'm just going to ignore it. And so around the 1600s, about 400 years ago, 1641, I believe, actually, is the year of this, René Descartes bifurcated the world. And we embraced the Magician and his tools of examining rationality, the material world of examination, which led to scientific reason and materialism, but we rejected the internal subtle space. This is very different from perceptions of this interior space in Eastern traditions, in shamanic traditions, and in medicine traditions. And when we get to the High Priestess, she opens the door or provides the gateway into that space for us, into the psychic world. Now, the card is full of rich symbolism, and it's hard to know where to start. But let's start right in the middle with the Torah. So she's holding the Book of Law, and the Book of Law isn't, the way that I interpret it in any case, isn't the Jewish Torah. This Book of Law that she holds is natural law, and it is the process by which and the features of this psychic domain. We have a number of different functions within this space and figures within this space that we don't have access to in normal conversational consensus reality in the West. We don't accept that these things exist. Nevertheless, they do. So these are the psychic laws that we all are structured by. Now, you can see her dress in the foreground. Looks a lot like water. It's flowing liquid. There's a moon embedded there, and the moon it brings in the crescent moon brings in the three cycles or three phases of the moon: the maiden moon, the mother moon, and the crone moon. This corresponds to the goddess we know as Hecate. Hecate is the queen of the witches. Not in a malicious or malevolent way, but just in a way that gives us access to the unconscious. She's one of the only very few figures in Greek mythology and rooting back into Egyptian mythology that can go into the underworld and come back to the world of men. So she has a correspondent figure we know as Mercury or Thoth or Hermes, but Hecate is the queen of the witches of the psychic world and the psychic domain. So we have the three phases of the moon here, and women will know, of course, that we have the biological and rhythmic cycles of the body related to fertility and creativity. The water, emotions, creativity, fertility is also part of that symbolism. Then when we look into her so this is the figure in the foreground of the card. The background of the card is this. We have the twin pillars, Boaz and Joachim. And those two pillars correspond to Kabbalistic symbolism, the Kabbalah, which is a Hebrew tradition, the original text that we know of that is referenced so frequently in the studies of the Kabbalah is called the Sefer Yetzirah. That dates to about 1100 AD, as far as I can tell. It maps out 10 Sephira. And we can't see the whole glyph here, but this glyph appears numerous times within the tarot, and it's a repeating theme. It had the two pillars as well, Boaz and Joachim, correspond to the left wing and the right wing of the Kabbalah. Their names translate as or symbolized as mercy and severity, or we can think of it in terms of the big five personality types. Openness and conscientiousness, in astrological terms as Jupiter and Saturn. The gods Zeus and Kronos, growth and structure. And in order to enter the holiest of holies, the ancient biblical stories suggest that only the high priest, the Jewish high priest, can pass between these two pillars within the Temple of Solomon in order to access the holiest of holies. These are the secrets of our relationship with God. So that the secret to our relationship with God involves entering into the psychic world, the world of thoughts, feelings, dreams, imaginations, intuitions, and memories. It doesn't seem so far-fetched. I think a lot of us perhaps at one point or other in our lives have thought of God as something or somebody outside of ourselves. But some of the secrets here in esoteric traditions are that our pathway to God is to go within. Now, these 10 sephira are sequentially developing, let's say, phases or states of consciousness. They correspond, if you've ever read the book Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn Mace, this was about 25 years ago, I think. We're talking mid-90s. Carolyn Mace is still lecturing and teaching. She wrote this tremendous book that compared or overlaid the 7 chakras of the Hindu tradition, the Kabbalistic tradition, the 10 sephira, and the 7 virtues or 7 sacraments of the Christian tradition in terms of sequential development. So the presupposition here is that over time our psychic lives develop, and we can see that reflected even in modern psychology. I've talked about the psychologist Robert Kegan, who is a professor of psychology at Harvard University, wrote a number of books, one called The Evolving Self, talks about stages of adult development, and there are 2, 3, or even more stages of development into adulthood, development of our psyche, right? So psychic development. And we get into further and further degrees of complexity until we get to the top 2 of the 3 sephira. I think they're Chokmah and Bina, and they correspond to wisdom and knowledge or understanding. So to be able to balance these 2, and we start with the physical body, with emotions and actions. We reach the altruism of the heart at Tiferet, and this Kabbalah shows this psychic progression over time. And the only way that we can truly work with those energies and those medicines is to turn inwards. We can't find the answers outside, which is this kind of secret message of being able to go between the 2 pillars. So pathway between the 2 pillars, very, very simply and easy, is meditation, focused contemplation. And the 2 are distinct, but any process where we turn inwards and we move our attention into this subtle realm or this psychic realm is a time when we activate these kinds of energies, and we can access this type of growth and development and kind of recognize where we've been coming. You know, one of the interesting things that in my meditations on this, I talked about Boaz and Joachim, this mercy and severity. They actually correspond to, I said the left wing and the right wing of the Kabbalah, but they correspond to our left wing and right wing of our politics as well. There are different energies that we embody as individuals, where some are more inclined towards openness and some are more inclined towards structure and order. And we can think of this. I live in the business world. That's my day-to-day and work-a-day thing. Is I work in the finance business. We can think of this as growth and entrepreneurship, which is a required function of a healthy economy. But entrepreneurs are risk takers, and they often get themselves into trouble. And walk this wire of pushing boundaries and creating things. But entrepreneurs are actually terrible at running companies. Just look at Elon Musk. Now, the other side of that trade, if you want to talk finance again, is the structure, order, and conscientiousness that is required to actually run a business. If you want to manage the books properly, if you want to manage client relationships properly, if you want to do consistent long-term growth and have a company that's going to exist in 50 years, you need the other side of this complementary energy set. But one of the things that we need to do more of, in my opinion, in this world, as far as our psychic awareness goes, is to recognize that we need both. And right now in the world that we're in, we're incredibly polarized. So we have people who have constellated themselves around one of these pillars, the severity or discipline pillar, and we have others that have constellated themselves around the growth and creativity and openness pillar. One is focused more on the past, one is focused more on the future. And in order to actually get anywhere in psychic development, we have to recognize that these two pillars can't exist without the other. So in times of government, I recognize that if we have a government that's driven by liberal tendencies, for too long, the government expands too much. We get too many. We get too top heavy, and tend to spend too much money and tend to overtax our citizenry in order to accomplish societal goals. And the check and balance is the conservative side. And conservatives tend to come in and they tend to impose order and balance the books, or at least that's the rhetoric and philosophy and theory. And they tend to focus more on structure and order, whereas liberals tend to focus more on creating opportunity. You can't have one without the other. In any situation or system or country or governance body politic, if one of them takes over to the detriment of the other, or even the destruction or annihilation of the other, which is what we see in the narrative warfare that's happening in politics in the United States right now, you actually get into totalitarianism. You get into a completely broken system. One needs to recognize that we have these two polarities within our lives as individuals. We have to find that balance between growth and order, and we need to do that as a society as well. If we reject it, we get into all kinds of trouble. And in looking back at history, you can see how those problems manifest themselves over and over and over again. These two pillars are extremely important in terms of creating a psychic map of human existence, of how we exist as individuals, groups, and societies. And it implies this developmental process that we all go through, balancing mercy and severity as we do so. Now, I'm going to finish off with the pomegranate, because the Sephira, those are the energy centers that are represented in the Kabbalah, that are on the tapestry behind the High Priestess, are pomegranates. And pomegranates have this rich symbolism associated with them. They're not the only time in the tarot that we see pomegranates represented. You can see them in the robe of the Fool, if I'm not mistaken. They represent life, rebirth, fertility. There's a life and death and rebirth cycle that they represent. What else do pomegranates? Eternal life, abundance. So when we apply that symbolism, or we recognize that symbolism in the Sephira, presumably in the holiest of holies, there's a deep suggestion here that if we can find the balance between these two pillars, we can go between them, we can find the mediated psychic space. There is a developmental pathway or a set of established markers that we would go through in terms of our psychic development in our journey as human beings, that leads to abundance, fertility, rebirth, transcendent of life, transcendent of death, and eternal life. Now, finishing with this. In the Magician card, the number 1 card, which is complementary to the High Priestess, we have those 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and air, the pentacles, cups, swords, and wands, that correspond to the 4 suits of the minor arcana. It gives us a hint or suggestion, or shows us in a microcosm of this card what the rest of tarot looks like. And as we know, there are 56 cards in the minor arcana that outline a character type, 16 different character types, just like Carl Jung mapped out in what became the Myers-Briggs on 4 spectrums. And we see 4 suits of 10 cards showing a progression of events or circumstances within the mundane world. So the Magician corresponds to the mundane world. The priestess, high priestess, corresponds to the psychic world. And these 10 sephira and the implication of psychic development in a process that we go through are reflected and mapped out in the major arcana. And we see archetypes and energies associated with each of these different sephira presenting themselves in various places and through various symbolism in the major arcana as we go through this exploration. That's a ton. I studied tarot cards for more than 20 years before I had a really big pop on the meaning and the power of the High Priestess card. And I've done my best to convey some of it here for you today, but the only way that you can really understand its power is to develop yourself to a situation where you can pass through between these two pillars and enter this psychic domain and abide by its rules, as outlined in the Torah or suggested here, and recognize the internal currents and phases that you go through, and really develop your psychic self. My name is Shannon Douglas. This has been Tarot Tuesday. This is a second go-round on the major arcana. I'm refining a little bit of the message and analysis I'm doing for each of these cards as I go along. Make sure that you like the video and subscribe. And if you know people who are tarot fans, if you're part of groups online, and you want to share some of these ideas or use these videos to generate discussion, I'd love it if you shared those. It gives me points at YouTube as I'm growing my audience. And next week we're going to tackle, oh, by the way, this is a little bit of a bonus. Next week we're going to tackle begin with the Empress and move on to the Emperor. But the bonus is this: we pre-frame or first encounter in the Magician the conscious mind. And much of the energy that moves and exists within the High Priestess is the unconscious mind. That's the watery flowing robes. So we first get this, and we could call one an ego and one, it's not a shadow yet because we're early in the developmental stage of us as human beings. But we have these two processes of consciousness and unconsciousness. In the developmental path or developmental process, we actually don't develop an unconscious until we're 4 or 5 or 6, when we develop a self-contained ego, at which point everything else becomes unconscious. So up to that point, age 3, 4, 5, we've really just been running around as unconscious beings. In any case, I ramble on. I could talk about this stuff forever and ever. If you've got questions, things you'd like me to address, or other topics you'd like me to cover, either on Tarot Tuesdays or the other run that parallel that I do called Soul Mapping, let me know in the comments below. And looking forward again to chatting with you and sharing more about tarot in next week's Tarot Tuesday.